What difference does it make whether America is forecast in Bible prophecy? Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries.
Welcome, friends. This is Dane Rome, your announcer for today's Last Days Beacon program. Thanks again for listening. Thanks for joining us. And just a reminder that these programs are supported by your gifts to this ministry. If you would like to contribute to this ongoing faith ministry, which deals with Bible prophecy and current events, simply go to our website to contribute. Our website address is www.swpm.us. You'll find a donate link on the homepage. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Thank you for your prayers and support for this faith ministry. On today's program, Dr. Schnitker interviews Pauldinger, author of the October Last Days Beacon article entitled America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy. Mr. Dinger offers a rebuttal of the recent trend among prophecy teachers who teach that America is not prophesied in the Bible. In these interviews, he makes the case that America's greatest leaders, from Christopher Columbus to Presidents McKinley and Reagan, have taught that America has a special place in end times Bible prophecy. So let's join Dr. Schnitker and Pauldinger for today's informative message.
Thank you, Dane, and welcome again, friends. Today we conclude a series of interviews with Pauldinger, author of our October Last Days Beacon article entitled, America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy. As we have already learned in our earlier discussions, this is a view that is not universally held among evangelical Bible prophecy teachers today. So what we're trying to do is take a historical and biblical approach to seeing whether indeed this idea that America is forecast in Bible prophecy is worthy of our consideration. So Paul, welcome back to today's program.
Thank you, David.
Well, it's great to have you back, and I certainly appreciate your understanding of American history in particular. That is a weakness that many of those who are the victims, or we should say graduates of the media education complex, do not always have a firm or true grasp of American history, so we're trying to recover some of that. And there's an issue or an event that you mentioned in our last week's program that in your view was represented a sea change in America's belief, and that was the 1925 Scopes trial that we can't review that too much, but we of course had the classic contest between the 1900 Democrat candidate, William Jennings Bryan, one of the most prominent evangelicals of the early 20th century, and another lawyer, a liberal lawyer, whose name escapes me. What was his name? Was it Scopes? Anyway.
You mean the lawyer at the Scopes trial?
Yes, the
Clarence Darrow?
Yes, Clarence Darrow. And of course, this was the famous trial that related to whether it was legal to teach evolution in the public schools in Tennessee. But without regurgitating the details of that event, tell us how you feel the 1925 Scopes trial changed America's belief that it was forecast in Bible prophecy.
Well, as I was saying earlier, there were this husband and wife sociologist team. I think their last name was the Lunds, and they did a sort of a survey of American beliefs, middle-class American beliefs, and I think it was in 1924, just before the Scopes trial. And what they found was that Americans were pretty much on board with the teachings of the book series, the fundamentals. They believed that America was forecast in Bible prophecy. And then the Scopes trial comes along, and make no mistake, the Scopes trial was nothing less than a highly organized conspiracy of ferocious atheists like Clarence Darrow. We see in the trial the judge allowed Darrow to go on and on about various Bible ideas that he claimed were stupid. But then when it came time to deliberate, the judge told the jurors, okay, you can't bring in any of that Bible stuff. That's not relevant to this case. Well, if it's not relevant to the case, why did he let Darrow go on and on about it? And the answer is that Darrow was playing not to the jurors. He was playing to an army, 100 reporters who had assembled all from across America for this little backwoods trial, which was simply about, did Scopes violate the law banning teaching of evolution? Well, at that time, half of the American states had the same law. But this conspiracy focused on the Tennessee trial because they wanted to make Bible beliefs look like, backwoods, stupid, moronic stuff. In any event, it was called at the end by the media the trial of the century. Well, how did they know it was the trial of the century? I mean, this is 1925. There's 75 more years left in the century. But as it turns out, they were right, because the Scopes trial became the dividing line between the old beliefs and the new beliefs, so that the Lunds did a second follow-up study after the trial. I think it was during the New Deal in the 1930s. And what they found was that middle-class Christians were moving away from the old beliefs. They were moving away from fundamentalism. And from there, Americans were beginning to move more and more away from the old beliefs. World War II comes along, and after World War II, we have the Supreme Court issuing the separation of church and state ruling, which essentially was a follow-up to the Scopes trial, which said that you can't have any of this Christian stuff, this Bible stuff, in the public square. It just doesn't belong there. And from that point forward, America became more and more liberal and anti-Bible until today. We're living in the apostate era.
Just as a sidebar to that, and I know that you're already aware of this, but in the 1920s, the moneyed elite, like the Rockefellers, the Warburgs, the founders of the Federal Reserve, also bought up the 25 largest newspapers in America and began to consolidate America's news industry, so that by the time of the Scopes trial, the reporting was, even though there were 100 reporters or such, but the reporting was uniformly negative toward fundamentalism. And so it was definitely a propaganda piece by a now consolidated American media machine that spoke with one voice in their condemnation of America's fundamentalist beliefs.
Well, if I may, David, the Scopes trial was the first shot of the 20th century culture war. And the 20th century culture war is, beneath the covers, a spiritual war. It is an atheist assault on American Christianity. And here you have the mass media as we know it today was basically formed with all of its various tentacles in the 1920s. So here you're in the very middle of the 1920s. The mass media is still in the cradle, and it attacks American Bible beliefs and has been doing the same, just as you were saying, ever since.
Right.
And it's not, the idea that there's, any fairness and, both sides and all that stuff is absolutely ridiculous. The mass media is, as we're seeing with the Kavanaugh nomination, a character assassination squad.
Yes, and it is monolithic. I mean, the consolidation that began in the 20s, now you have 5 or 6 mega media corporations that basically control just about everything.
Right.
Printed media, Hollywood movies, the television networks, the cable news networks, etc. Internet news. If you follow the money, they're really consolidated into 5 mega corporations that control about 95% of everything that we are exposed to in the way of news. And it's a uniform perspective, as you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a follow-on to that, Paul, is why do Americans today scoff at what Americans have believed for most of American history?
Well, Hitler, among others, big-time sociologist Freud, said that people come into the world and they don't know anything. They're a blank slate, and they will do what they're told to do. And what you have from 1925 on is Americans being absolutely overwhelmed with voices on radio, on TV, in the movies. And these voices are not saying anything about the big truths of the world, of the Bible. They're at war with them. So what you have is gradually the mass media has herded Americans into this atheistic ghetto. So today you have the most atheistic generation in American history, nicknamed or named the millennials. Of all the names that you could choose for them, what are they going to live for the entire millennium? Is that so? Americans really are in a grip of delusion. Does that answer your question?
Yes. In fact, I recall a statement that was made by some years back by a citizen of the Soviet Union. And he said that Americans are subject to the most sophisticated propaganda in the world.
Mm-hmm.
He said here in the Soviet Union, when the TASS news agency makes a pronouncement, we all know it's propaganda. But Americans do not know that their news media is also spouting propaganda, because we have the illusion of choice. You have multiple networks, but if you listen closely, they're all sharing the same uniform perspective. They are lying in unison.
Well, David, as we had talked about earlier, Americans are going around and referring to the constitutional ban on a legally enacted church in America, but they're not calling it by what it's called in the Constitution. They're calling it separation of church and state. Well, those very words are in the Constitution, not the American Constitution, the Constitution of the former Soviet Union. When the Supreme Court ruled on separation of church and state, they were borrowing those words from the enemy, the Cold War enemy Constitution, and putting them in the American Constitution. There is no separation of church and state doctrine in the Constitution.
And again, ironically, with the fall of the Soviet Union, in my view, modern Russia has more religious freedom than we have in America because of this false doctrine of the separation of church and state. The removal of the church, i.e. Christian influence and biblical doctrine, from the public square. That's one of the ironies of history. Well, let me conclude with kind of a broad-ranging question that you can take in any way you would like, Paul. And that is this: why is the recapturing of the American vision that America is the fifth empire, the vestibule to the millennium. Why is this view of importance to Christians today, and is there a philosophical and practical implication to this view?
Well, Americans don't understand how close they are to hell on earth. When America goes, as Lincoln and Reagan called America the last best hope, when America goes, hell comes. This world has a shelf life according to the Bible, and we're approaching that shelf life. But also countries have a shelf life. And America is approaching the end of its rope. We may be doing the last prophecy of America in last days beginning, but the last prophecy is Christ sending the four horsemen of the apocalypse to America. And if Americans, we are in an apostate age. There's no question about that. I mean, the signs are all over the place. I mean, when you have a nation like ours, which is so close to what Sodom and Gomorrah was, and not just in the normalization of homosexuality, but in the pornography epidemic, the molestation epidemic, the atheism, when you put it all together, America has become the modern version of Sodom. And the biblical lesson on that is that God has to destroy Sodom, or he'll have to, as Billy Graham said, apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. So we're very close. And when you see the madness that's going on around this whole Kavanaugh issue, I saw, in Boston, thousands of women getting together and basically calling for the lynching of Judge Kavanaugh without any evidence. I mean, there's no evidence for the charges against Kavanaugh. It's all charges. And in this, you see this massive delusion going on, and you wonder how long can this go on? How long does America have?
Absolutely. I see, as we've talked offline before, a gigantic tug of war of cosmic forces. The devil wants to recruit and use America as the muscle for their new world order. And God wants to restore its vision of America as the fifth empire that will usher in the millennium, with, of course, the interruption of the 7-year period of tribulation and the exodus of the church via the rapture. So we have a divine vision where God indeed wants to use America as His great nation, a nation that has in the past been greatly used for evangelism, for the defense of the nation Israel, as really the leader of freedom in the world. The devil wants to totally turn that around and use America as the leader for his new world order. And so there's this gigantic tug of war going on, and I believe that part of winning that is to have an information war where we tell the truth in humility but boldness, that God's design for America is that we would be that fifth monarchy, the choicest monarchy, the choicest empire in time, as George Berkeley expressed it, that would be used of God to help usher in the expansion of the gospel throughout the world, that will usher in the second coming and the worldwide millennium.
Well, there was this idea, David, among the founders, and you see it in the Great Seal motto, E pluribus unum. The diversity of the world becomes one in America, but by unum, they meant Christ. So in other words, there was this idea that the founders had from the Old Testament. One of the prophets, I don't know if it was Jeremiah or Isaiah, was talking about a place where the elect of the world would gather in the last days. And so the Sounders had this idea very strong in their minds that what they were doing was essentially forming the lifeboat for the world, so that the elect of the world could come to America, could become Christians, and be saved. That was a big idea that today is completely lost.
Yes, and as I see that, it does seem to be a precursor or a vestibule for that great gathering of the elect from around the world under Christ's reign and leadership, earthly reign, during the millennium, as a precursor to that. So it's a totally different perspective than what the secularists have done in hijacking America and basically using it to advance their New World Order. Well, that's all the time we have for today. And Paul, we thank you for these informative interviews dealing with the October Last Days Beacon article entitled, "America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy." And now our announcer, Dane Rome, will share how you may obtain a copy of this informative article.
Thank you, Dr. Schnitker. Today, we're offering an excellent article to accompany this series of messages. Our October Last Days Beacon article is entitled, "America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy." In this article, Pauldinger offers the rebuttal case to the "America isn't in the Bible" argument in the court of public opinion. You may order 5 copies for $5 or 25 copies for $15 contribution. Just go to our website, www.swpm.us, and go to our bookstore. Type in the title of the article, "America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy." The website address again is www.swpm.us. Please join us again for next week's Last Days Beacon program, brought to you by Southwest Prophecy Ministries. And until then, this is your announcer, Dane Rome, saying thanks for listening.